Today I sat down with a serial entrepreneur by the name of Norman Crowley. Norman had sold his first business by the age of 20 and his second by the age of 28, promptly retiring, only a month later realizing that that wasn't quite it. By the age of 40, he'd sold 3 companies, totaling $750 million in exit value, which is quite remarkable by the age of 40. Today, Cool Planet is looking to take on even bigger problems, and that's making sure that we cool the planet. Pun intended there. And our conversation really talks about some of the things that have worked for him in his career. And namely, I think the topic we covered that was most interesting is everything that relates to building a culture in your business and how that can help sustain the business in perpetuity. It's not necessarily about exits, which is all the rage right now. It's about why are you doing what you're doing and having a mission-led business. And these are all the things that Norman really leads into and leans into. And if you listen to the episode, you'll get some pretty solid insights into how you can build a company that sustains in future. Welcome to Successful Scales, the show where I talk to world-class professionals on what it takes to scale successful businesses. I dive deep asking questions to people who are running unicorn businesses, to raising funds, to buying businesses, mergers and acquisitions, IP and patent law, what is to manage performance management. I mean, the list goes on. The idea really is, how do I create knowledge and learning for you guys listening in? And of course, myself, getting the floor with people who I, in many cases, would never dream to share a room with. Before we jump into the episode, I've got to give a special thank you to our sponsors. Firstly, over at Global Wide Advisors, a leading digital consumer products investment bank focused on optimizing the sales process. An incredible team, always happy to pick up the phone and educate you or anyone about the sales process and what you should really consider, and can obviously help take you to market or even acquire businesses. I ring them for just about everything these days. Us over at Multiply Me, we are the end-to-end executive search and HR function into the Philippines, helping find better talent and onboarding them effectively. And last but not least, Escala, our management consultancy focused on process improvement, where we help build better systems for your business. That's all the ads you're going to get from me, ladies and gentlemen. The rest is all about learning. I hope you really enjoy and get as much out of these sessions as I do, sitting face to face with some of the world-renowned leaders in their respective fields, asking them the tough questions that they're not often asked. All right, Norman, welcome to an episode of Successful Scales. I really appreciate you taking the time to jump on.
Good to be here.
Well, we've had a pretty solid 20-minute conversation before diving in, and such is the fascination I have with what you're up to and, just how revolutionary, rather, your goal is in terms of what your mission is when we talk about sort of all the businesses that fall under your driving umbrella. But before we dive into anything that relates to that, I'd love it if you could take as much time as you need. I know you have a pretty long, impressive, and extensive career to sort of fill us in, but just please take us through a little bit of your journey and what's led up to today.
Yeah, so I guess I grew up in Ireland in the 80s, and my kind of entrepreneurial career is I set up my first business when I was 15. And my dad showed me how to weld. And we grew up on a farm out the country. There was no money. There was never any money in Ireland back then anyway. And so I became kind of obsessed with, how can I make my own money? How can I be independent? And so my dad taught me how to weld. And from the time I was 15, I used to do welding jobs for farmers and for builders. And by the time I was 20, I had like 15 people working for me, welding and doing engineering. And then I always wanted to do stuff around tech. I always thought the tech guys were the coolest guys. And so sold that business when I was 20, that engineering business, and set up a tech company and learned the ropes of being a tech company, and grew that to about 200 people, 5 countries. And in 1999, sold that to a telecoms company, and kind of retired actually at the ripe old age of 28 for about a month.
Yeah.
And I discovered that in retirement that everyone else, all my mates were still working. And you have this vision like I'm going to retire in my 20s and buy a nice car and have a cool house and be a cool cat. And actually, you just discover you're a bit of a dope and nobody wants to hang around with you because they're working, right? And then I realized, I guess it was about the work. And so started another software company, and that one became quite a monster. It was called Inspired Gaming Group. And we built that from 8 people to 2,500 people, floated it on the London Stock Exchange, and sold it to private equity in 2008 for about $500 million. And along the way, we set up another business called The Cloud, which was, and probably still is, Europe's largest Wi-Fi operator. We sold that to Rupert Murdoch in 2011. And all during the 2000s, apart from doing that stuff, I was learning quite a lot about climate change. I'd seen An Inconvenient Truth and became kind of slightly obsessed with that. And so then when we sold out of The Cloud, I realized that, like, what are we going to do? There's no point in setting up another business that just buys something for $1 and sells it for $2. We need to have, the next thing we do needs to have meaning. And so we started working on a lot on climate change, but from a business point of view. And the flaw that we noticed about climate change at the time was, like, I always call it my sustainable girlfriend. If I said to you, I've got a new girlfriend, well, you might be surprised because I'm happily married, but you would say, what's your girlfriend like? And if I said, well, she's sustainable, your mind would go, that doesn't seem that interesting. Or she doesn't seem, or if I said to you, hey, why don't you come over to my place on Friday night? We're having a sustainable dinner party. You'd kind of go, let me check my diary, but that doesn't sound like a lot of fun, right? And so, and that was, sustainability is synonymous with the lesser or the least worst best option, right? And we were there at the time. Elon Musk was just starting to come out with the cars, and solar was kind of cool, and a lot of stuff we were doing was kind of cool. And I was like, this sustainable thing is fundamentally, we've been hawking this stuff for 30 or 40 years about things that are kind of sustainable equals kind of crap, right? And so what we started to do was build a bunch of businesses that showed people that sustainable was actually quite cool. It was profitable. It was what we were talking about in the preamble to this, like infinite ethical wealth creation. And to us, solving climate change is infinite ethical wealth creation. And so the group is called Cool Planet Group. And even the clue is in the name, right? It's a cool planet. So it's cooler, i.e. it's not warming, but also it's kind of cool, right?
Smart.
And so, yeah.
Very
Actually,
clever.
it was my daughters came up with that in the car with me one day. So, and so what we started doing first, we set up a business that did energy efficiency, which is dreadfully boring. Well, the outcome is ridiculously exciting, but you can't get people excited in a bar about energy efficiency. But what energy efficiency is if you look at the world, in order to solve climate change, you need to solve energy, transport, meat, right? If you solve energy, transport, meat, then you're done. And so the first one we focused on was energy. And the world every year digs out between $3 and $4 trillion of energy out of the ground, right? And then we promptly waste 3.5 trillion of the 4 that we dig out. And we're very wasteful, right? And so the first thing we started doing was working with the biggest carbon emitters in the world, everyone from the largest mining company to the largest concrete company. And what blew us away was we were able to save them like 30% of the energy they were consuming. So that was a big financial win, but it was also a big carbon win. And that was the first thing we got involved in. And that business, we grew that, like we operate that in 23 countries. It works with 3 of the top 4 food companies, biggest mining company, 7 of the top 8 pharmaceutical companies, and so on. And that took us 6 or 7 years to grow that. Out of that, what we noticed about doing projects with them and consulting with them was they didn't know where their energy was going at all, right? And so we built what's called Clarity, which is an energy management platform. And that was the beginning of our kind of software journey. And then customers came to us and they said, hey, we not only need to know in real time where all this waste is going, whether it's a big building or a big factory, but we also need to know, we need to account for all this carbon. So that got us into carbon accounting. And then they came to us and they said, hey, we want to electrify our fleet, right? So we've got 13,000 trucks and we need to electrify them. So then we started building the platform around them. And we've always loved cars, right? Who doesn't like cars? And then we started to build our own cars. And that's where Ava came from, which is our automotive brand. And so now everything that we do sits on what we call a decarbonisation platform. So if you're a big polluter, a big carbon emitter, a big business, and you need to decarbonize, then we supply the services that run along that. And now that's understanding where you're consuming your energy, understanding your fleet, understanding how you can generate energy, and then how do you account for all this carbon. And so now it's quite a big business, I guess.
Yeah, wow, lots to unpack there, Norman. You've done a lot of big things that you just casually brushed through, but I think also it's probably a bit of a testament to you and your motivating factors, and clearly what's important. And I think that so many of the people that I get on the show, they really have a target in mind, and it's usually pretty narrowly focused. And we were talking a little bit about this before we hit play, or record rather, and that's a lot of guys are looking, or girls are looking for an impending exit in a 3 to 5 minute, that'd be nice, 3 to 5 year window. When we talk about venture capital specifically, and you clearly are looking to focus on the problem at hand, and that's carbon emission, and then sort of work backwards into how do I bring all the pieces to solve that overarching mission driven business objective. So, I mean, probably I'm taking a stab in the dark here, but it probably helps that at 28 you could retire as an oldie, and you sort of could move onto it. But I guess my first question to you around that is, how much of that ability, or that comfort, call it what you will, enabled you to start focusing on, I guess, what I would describe or deem as more important? What was the psychology there?
Yeah. Well, so newsflash, it never gets comfortable, right? So I'm sure people in your podcast have talked about imposter syndrome, right? Imposter syndrome is, regardless of how well it's going, you automatically think you're faking it and you're going to get caught out, right? And let me skip to the end for anyone who's only starting out in business. You always feel like that, right? And the drive, like, I work harder now than I've ever worked in my life. Like now it's kind of 6.5 day a week type thing, because our kids are grown up and they're doing their own thing. And that's again because of this drive. And the entrepreneurial drive doesn't come from an entirely positive place, right? If you talk to most entrepreneurs who are successful, they have to prove all the time to, it was their parents or the community, or they have to prove to somebody that they can really do this all the time. And so the drive of being an entrepreneur is not an entirely positive thing, right? And so you always feel like you have to move to the next level. It's never good enough. And so having money early on doesn't really help, because it's never enough. You're never good enough. And so you always have to keep driving. And so people say to me, well, it's easy for you to care about the planet because, you made money earlier on. But like, we have a monster payroll that has to be made every month, right? And we have business targets, and we've committed to our shareholders and everything about what we're doing. So the pressure never leaves. It's in earlier on, you're worried about paying the mortgage. When you've got, when you have achieved enough not to worry about that, you're worried about paying your 7th mortgage. And so you always dig a bigger hole for yourself, right? And some people don't, right? Some people, they create a business of whatever size and they sell it, and then they sit on a beach in Thailand, right? And that's great and good for them. But the thing that they would admit to you is that, when you're building a business, it's stressful, but it's about the team and it's about getting there. When you've sold it, all of that fun stops, right? And so then you're just another guy or girl sitting at the beach bar talking shite, right?
Yep. Yep. Spot on. But I guess less so about the drive. I think I would agree with you. I think there's a lot of people, and I would probably class them in the accidental entrepreneur class, where maybe they came up with a really good solution and it resulted in a great business. And I can think of lots of people, and it's super impressive and amicable, where, they have their exit and they ride off into the sunset. But it sounds to me like your drive it's very deep seated, and it's something now where you're focusing your attention on, just like you said, you have to continue to prove. And of course, I'm not, very acutely aware of imposter syndrome, and I feel it every day myself. It's that, it's that notion of now you can really go after something big that's going to have, far-reaching impact on not just you, but, you're talking about your children that have grown up now. This is things that will change their life over the course of the rest. It's building legacy effectively, but in a way in which it has true impact.
Yeah, and you can look at it like some people summarize and they go, you made a bit of money, so now you can afford to care about people. It's such a horseshit cop out that, it's like, let's talk about it for pure money, right? If you want to make a lot of money, and if you're going to set up a business, there's no point in making a little bit of money. It's very stressful, it's very painful, right? So you might as well make a lot of money. If you want to make a lot of money, you need to do something that's going to impact 1 billion people, right? And so if you're just looking at it from a pure money point of view, climate change is the ultimate gold rush, right? Because it's impacting every single human on the planet. So that's one way of looking at it. And the other way to look at it is, when we had no money, right, and we were broke, we had a charity in our business, right? So when we had our gaming company and we were worried about next week's payroll, we had a charity called Right to Sight that we incubated in that, right? And so you do not, if you're listening and you're thinking about this and you're saying it's easy for the guy who's made a couple of bucks, right, to do this, don't think about it like that. The doing good bit is so rewarding and so important to the team and yourself that do good from the beginning, right? Whether doing good is making sure that John, who works with you, can get a mortgage and so that he can get married or whatever it might be, that's equally as important as the making money piece, right? And if you focus too much on making money, and I know it's a cliche, people can smell that off you, right? Yeah. It's much better when you're setting it up to have the team be equally as important as the mission, as equally as important as making money, right? It's important to try and keep all of them at the same level of priority, because if you make making money personally more important than the team, they can smell that off you and they will leave, right? If you make making money more important than the customer can smell it off you and he will leave or she will leave. So it is important to have them all in balance all the time.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. And I think that one of my team was showing me sort of the 2022 updated Maslow's hierarchy of needs, when you talk about marketing. And one of the things that is like, the new self-actualization is how you actually impact others, and how that is really becoming the critical sort of like final step in that sense of fulfillment. Because I think for a lot of entrepreneurs, if money's the driving focus and that's all you're in to make, then you'll probably make far less of it and it'll be way less fulfilling. And like we were talking about, it's not just about, getting to that point where you drive your Ferrari and then so what's next then? What have you really achieved here? It's a material product that has a shelf life, and especially the way in which us as humans are wired these days about instant gratification and the need to pick up the mobile phone. It's not going to last very long. So I think that mission led focus and how you can have impact is just, it's going to be more and more meaningful for so many people and result in, success in whatever that looks like for anyone listening in. So, I mean, I'd love to dive into, I mean, you've had an incredible experience over the course of your career today. I mean, from growing from 8 to 2,500 employees, and then having that exit for, I think it was $500 million, you said. I mean, huge gap, huge difference between 8 people and 2,500 people. And, that journey that you went on. I mean, when you look back at maybe that one specifically, I know that there's been lots of these sort of evolutions, but what are some of the key breaking points, or the things where you would have those moments in the company where, what we were doing at 8 employees isn't working at 50 team members anymore, like operationally, or what was some of the different areas that, again, remembering that the audience are people who are looking to build and successfully scale companies, what are some of the things that stand out to you as critical stages?
Yeah. Look, they're all critical, I guess, right? There's been a lot of books written about, you meet an inflection point at 10 people, you meet an inflection point at 60 people, and so on, right? The thing that we've learned in all that time is, those inflection points are actually just showing you cracks in you, the entrepreneur, and your team, right? And it begins with you, the entrepreneur, right? You have to be, it's so challenging, but you have to be comfortable in your own skin. And then you have to be comfortable in communicating what's going on to the team. And where comfortable in your own skin comes into it is, for those entrepreneurs listening, there's a classic thing that happens, right? Is you hire your first person. And if you get lucky with your first person, you're not going to get lucky with your second person, right? Or certainly if you get the 3 or 4, you're going to be in trouble.
Yeah.
And so then comes, if you're comfortable in your own skin, you can go to the person that's not working out and say, it's not working out, and you need to go and, find where it is going to work for you, right? And the reason people talk about these breaking points at 10 and 50 is because they tolerate people who aren't good enough, who aren't performing enough, right? And then that breaking point comes at 10, or it comes at 50, or it comes at 2,000. What we have in our business now, and sadly it took us 30 years of operating businesses to learn this, is we have a chief culture officer, and her job, she runs HR, but she also runs a team who are just watching the culture all the time. And there's a great definition of culture, which is what happens when you're not there, right? And if you have an amazing culture and you build that from the ground up, then you don't have these breaking points, right? Because every person that's come in, you're policing them. And if they're not working out, they are leaving, right? And the culture is self-maintaining. And because we're not psychopaths, most of us, we don't like firing people. So we chicken out of firing people. Or nowadays we have this incredible woke culture where, especially in West Coast of the States or East Coast of the States, where it's like, well, I can't fire that person because they're fitting in a minority and we need more of that minority. And it's such a load of horseshit, right? Because I'm not saying watching your minorities and all that, that's critical to success, right? But tolerating people because you need them to fit a number is truly awful, right? And you will end up with this chaotic culture. And that can happen at 5 people, it can happen at 50 people, it can happen at 500 people. But if you can build the culture from the ground up as a brilliant reflection of what the business is trying to do, where everyone is hardworking, everyone is communicating with each other, everyone gets along, everyone enjoys what they're doing, that is the key. And then the business just grows and grows. But if you let the culture slide at any point, you will have a nightmare. And that nightmare will just get worse and worse and worse. And a lot of the time people sell businesses because the culture is so toxic. They, as the entrepreneur, can't wait to get out of the place. And one of the businesses I sold, I won't tell you which one, I sold it because the culture was really toxic, right? But I was the one who let the culture get that toxic, right? So, and to police that culture takes massive courage. The courage comes from being comfortable in your own skin.
And that's again, that's like counterintuitive to the imposter syndrome. I mean, it's funny. I don't know that I'm not a big believer in in God and in faith and things like that. But I think sometimes in life you sort of get to these moments where you speak to the people that you really needed to speak to at that time. And for me, we definitely internally are going through exactly this. I think it's very top of mind for me. We just hired a head of people and culture, and we've now put in a lot of work in how do we actually approach fostering and maintaining that culture. Now that we have so many team members, you lose your way. You can't get around to every single person in the business anymore. And you can't feel, sort of the quote unquote vibe and the culture and, how it is that you're looking to drive meaning and purpose for each and every individual that joins the business. It's not about what's in it for me. It's how can I support you, the team, and how can I help you achieve whatever it is your goal is, and how do we make sure that those things remain to be aligned? So with your chief culture, your chief culture officer, your CCO, I feel like I learn a new title every other week.
And by the way, CCO is not a bullshit title. Like, Rita, who runs culture, is a serious shit-kicking operator. Like, she used to be the chief operating officer. So this is not somebody fluffy with tissues and jelly beans on her desk, right? You don't want to cross Rita. She knows what a P&L is, right?
I wouldn't be upset with jelly beans on the desk. That's me personally, but
I would just eat too many.
Yeah. But to your point, for sure. I mean, we've brought our head of people and culture at our size is probably equivalent to your chief culture officer, and I'm sort of highlighting the fact that it's something that if founders get on this as a key agenda item from day one, it will totally, it'll transform the way in which they grow their business. And, going back and trying, it's just like the old builders saying, measure twice, cut once. If you can put in that time, or my personal favorite, if I had 6 hours to chop down a tree, I'd spend the first 4 sharpening my axe. It's that same logic if you get them in early. So I guess my real driving question is, what is Rita is her name? What is Rita's accountabilities and responsibilities, and what is the sort of again, 10,000 feet here. I'm not looking to detail every aspect, but like what's some of the frameworks that help foster and maintain and grow the cultural value that is each of the 3 entities that you're running?
Yep. So we handle it in 3 different ways, right? Or she does. One is, it centers around training, right? So the first part of training is technical training. Can you do the job, right? And that for us is handled online, right? So we use tools like LinkedIn Learning and things like that. And so if you want to teach, or if you want to learn Excel, or you want to learn whatever, then all of that training is handled at a digital level, right? The next level then is teaching you not to be an asshole, right? If you have tendencies of becoming one, and we all do. And for that, we have a whole internal training program that does that. And it's to do with interacting with other people, how to be a better person, how to be a better manager, all of that kind of thing. And that's built up over time using 3 or 4 external vendors that we use. The main vendor is a British company called Positive, right? Then the final bit is the bit that no company would ever do, right? And it consumes half our training budget, which is, and I'm not religious, but it's spiritual, right? So remember I said in the beginning that in order to be a good entrepreneur, you need to be comfortable in your own skin, right? And in order to be comfortable in your own skin, you need to feel a connection with other people, and you need to be comfortable that you can sit there yourself and just absorb the information, communicate that information back out without being an asshole about it, right? And for me, that internal security came about 15 years ago when I started meditating. And now I can hear half your audience rolling their eyes. But
my audience is woke. My audience is woke. I actually talk a lot about meditation. It's a part of my daily practice and journaling. So.
Yeah. But what we learned is some people love meditating, but for other people, meditating is not it, right? It's yoga, or it's deep breathing, or whatever it might be, right? but you need a spiritual practice to become comfortable in your own skin. And so what we did in that top tier of training is we used this system called Light that we co-developed. Well, we had a tiny part in developing. We were the kind of first customer, basically. And what it does is it builds up people's spiritual practice. And that could be across any one of 40 different spiritual practices. So whatever floats your boat, basically. And so when we look at our team and we build our team, we build it around technical training, I guess, interaction training, or training around how people interact with each other, and then training at an entirely different level, which is spiritual level. And we take these very seriously, and don't think that we're some kind of woke woo-woo fucking business. Like, we are ruthless about P&L and numbers and accountability, and we fire people fast if they're not performing. But on top of all of that, if you're in the team, we are making you better all the time. We're not making you better as an actor within our business. We are making you better as a human being, right? Because if you're better as a human being, you're better at home, you're better at work, you're better everywhere, right? And that's part of the job, right? And that's what our chief culture officer, she runs the hiring and the firing, but she also runs this key approach that we have to the people. And it's made such a ridiculous difference to the financial performance of the business. And if you're listening to this and you only have 2 people and you're saying, well, that's great when you're up at that level, but I don't have time to do that. Believe me, we got a lot of shit on every day, right? So you make the time for it when there's 2 people, and you make the time for it as you move off that into more people. And you're not going to get to 10,000 people unless you have some approach like this. Otherwise, people are just going to rip each other apart, and you're going to have all these growing pains.
I mean, the flow-on effect of what a program like this would mean for, like you called out, every aspect of life. I think in my practice, the starting or the last thing that's always said is think about why you're meditating today. Like, what is the deeper meaning and purpose behind it? And, often I'll think to myself, like, it's so that I'm calmer around my friends and my family and my my team. It's so that I can be more, you're thinking about sort of those levels. And so everything sort of transcends that linear box of, like, I'm trying to do this to achieve that. It's something much further reaching, and something that, again, when like when you invest in your people, they'll look after you. It's a very simple equation. And if it's not about, it's like we will say internally as well, if for whatever reason you outgrow the business and the opportunity isn't exciting for you, if we can't find you another place in the business where you are engaged and it's what you want to be doing, then you have our blessing. Like, the idea is not to retain people that aren't and don't retain or remain to be aligned with the driving vision, and they're not getting anything out of it. That's a surefire way to do it. So yeah, I mean, just really resonates with me in terms of how you're approaching that. And that's how I would genuinely believe that's how you sustain in market for 20 years. I want to actually dive in a little bit to something that I sort of picked up early on in our conversation. And you were talking about effectively like a 20-year vision around the business. Like, you sort of talked about a lot deeper planning or focus on the long outcome. So I'd love to just hear a little bit about how you approach that strategic planning and sort of what the driving mission is. Also, just to get back a little bit on track before we wrap up here on, on what your mission is and what you're looking to achieve in that 20-year period.
Well, like, I guess one of the keys to happiness and one of the keys to building a big business is to have a vision or have a mission that's bigger than yourself, right? And the one for us is climate change, because if we don't fix climate change, we're going to kill billions of people, right? And that's just unacceptable as an outcome. And so everything then that we do centers around that mission. It's like, so we say in the morning, rule number 1, cool the planet. Rule number 2, make money. Don't do 1 without 2, don't do 2 without 1, right? And it's a very simple mission, right? You see at the bottom of a lot of our logos, it just says cooling the planet, right? And it's to remind people constantly that's the job, right? And the 20-year version of what a lot of people do then is they say, well, I'm going to do that, and then we're going to exit the business or we're going to float it. But if you build an amazing team that you love and they love you, what are you exiting exactly, right? Or why are you exiting, right? And so if you say, well, I want to exit to build a big beach house, well, then why don't you just get the business to make enough money to supply you with a beach house, right? And then keep going, right? We've become obsessed with this exit thing. We have to exit it. But if you look back over the last 100 years of entrepreneurship, the best companies never exited. They're still there, right? And also, if you listen to people like Elon Musk, who I'd be a big fan of, he never talks about exits or valuations. The only thing he ever does is tells you the valuation is too high, right? So we've gotten that bug now as well. And so we have external investors and they have an exit window, but we create an exit for them by bringing in another investor or by buying them out, right? But we're still here, right? And it's because our life is completely wrapped up with the business. And people who talk about work-life balance, like, what is that? Like, that's where I want to work and then I want to go to the gym. But like, to me, they're like, I stopped before the recording and I went out and had a walk, right? Was that work-life balance? And then I went for a 3-hour walk yesterday because I was on a conference call that went on long. So I just walked up and down the beach 50 times, right? Like, is that work-life balance, right? Am I working or am I off at that time? And because the people I was having the conference call are my friends as well as my business colleagues, what is work-life balance? And the challenge or the trick is to get to a point where you're working with people you admire and you want to spend time with. The team you work with internally in your own organization, you want to spend time with. So there's this complete blurring of what it is you're doing. And that to me is nirvana. And why would you ever want to exit that, right? That's, you can have everything that you want within the organization that you are creating. And if you can get to that, then you have reached like the top level.
Yeah, I think that's very sound advice. And again, follows definitely a lot of what I hope to achieve. And again, it's about the lives that you touch and the people that you spend most of your time with. That's what matters most. And so, yeah, I mean, never been a driving objective for me. And I don't see it becoming one. Before I let you run, would just love to know if there's anyone that would want to get in touch with you, or more specifically, who would be the right audience to potentially engage any one of your 3 organizations, and what does that look like?
So the audience is people with big businesses who consume a lot of carbon. So it's any big company, anyone who has a big energy bill. That's our type of customer. And then if you want to follow us, depending on who you are, you'll find one or other thing entertaining. Our main website is coolplanet.io. If you want to follow me on Twitter, it's Norman Crowley 1. So it's NORMANCROWLEY and the number 1. And then if you don't like any of our serious climate change stuff and you're not a big carbon emitter and you just love cool shit, then look at our car business, which is studioava.com.
And I've looked at that myself, man. It is some cool shit.
There's some serious car porn there, right?
Definitely some serious. I couldn't believe that it was all electric. I mean, it's beautiful stuff. Well, Norman, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. And, super meaningful for me. And, you've left me with a lot of homework and notes to sort of implement inside of our business. I hope those listening at home got the same. So yeah, I really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Yoni.